Welcome, sir.
Welcome, sir.
Good evening. How are you all?
Good, sir. How
Hi,
are
sir.
you?
Good, sir.
Very good. Very good. Very
Yes,
good.
sir. Uh, so, guys,
So,
we are having a great entrepreneur with us now, Mr. Ajit Nair, sir. We are glad to have you with us today, sir. Mr. Ajit Nair, who is the co-founder of CMO and Camcom, which is an award-winning industry amongst AI-powered platform for visual inspection built on the computer vision stack. He has huge experience in the industry as he worked with various renowned companies like Ogre and Wipro. Along with the experience, he also had deep knowledge about various skills related like business analysis, business development, business intelligence, and much more. He also has soft and hard skills like team management, service delivery, customer relationship, and many more.
it's a privilege to share with you all that an article written by Ajit sir alongside Shrikant Beldona named Interoperability and Open Travel Alliance Standards Strategic Perspectives. It was published in the International Journal of Contemporary Hospitality Management. We congratulate you on behalf of our entire college and management, sir. Uh, I I know all the audience and listeners will surely enjoy and take back some knowledge from this amazing session. Now, Ajit Nair sir will share us about his experience in entrepreneurial journey. Sir, the platform is yours, sir.
So please, you can continue.
Thank you very much. I really don't know whether I will do justice to that major introduction that you guys just did. Okay. First and foremost, I should tell you that I'm not a technologist. I'm not an engineer. Actually, my father took a look at my 10th standard math score, and he said, "You'll never become an engineer." And actually, I am not an engineer. Okay, so I don't know to write a single line of code. I went to hotel school. I did hotel management. For me, Java has got nothing to do with technology. It's just good coffee. That's all it is. But what I have been doing all these years is selling technology. What I understand is convergence when it comes to technology. What I understand is how technology can enable or facilitate a return on investment and thereby in many ways have an impact on the three most important tenets that make up a business, which is the top line, the bottom line, and the customer satisfaction. But having said that, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate this opportunity that has been given to me. I really don't know whether I'll be able to do justice to where I'm speaking to the future leaders, the future technologists of tomorrow. And you are essentially talking to a person who's not even a technologist. So I really don't know how much of value I will add to this whole conversation. But for what I can tell you is my background. And much like all of you, what I have essentially gone through from the time that I was a student through to the time where I am today. One of you mentioned that I'm the CMO of Camcom, which is actually true. I'm one of the co-founder and the CMO. But I'm sure most of you would think that CMO in that specific instance stands for Chief Marketing Officer. Actually, no, I call myself the Chief Miscellaneous Officer of the company because I do everything else other than what I'm supposed to do. So, if you were thinking about having a lot of insights, a lot of strategic ideas, a lot of wisdom coming your way, I should admit that I will most probably not do justice to any of those adages that you essentially put forth. But nevertheless, thank you very much for this opportunity. I really appreciate that. In many ways, I enjoy talking to new people. I am that way a very adept salesman because I think that in many ways speaking to people helps me learn more than what I would essentially be of, in essence, try to sell to them. From a Genesis perspective, like I said, a 10 standard math scorecard, my father looked at it and said, "You'll never become an engineer," which is great because I never wanted to be an engineer, right? The only entrance exam I ever managed to get through was hotel management. That is why I went to hotel school. From there, I never worked in a hotel. Okay, I went straight into sales. Most people ask me, then why the hell did you do hotel management? Well, I don't know because that is the only entrance exam I got. Yeah. So any person who tells you that their life was essentially made up of a lot of judgment calls that they made based on conditions and strategy and all that. Well, none of that happened in my case. I just moved from one disaster to the other. I kept on moving from one disaster to the other. And that is how I landed up here. After hotel management, I joined this company at that time, and I'm talking about way before most of you were born. I'm talking about 95. I graduated from hotel management, and I joined this company called Fidelio. Fidelio was a company that was dealing with hotel software. And in those days, hotels were just adopting software. So think about Fidelio as the SAPs of the world, the Oracles of the world for the hospitality and the leisure industry. That is where I joined them. And why did I join them? Well, my first job outside of hotel school, my campus placement was as a management trainee at the Leela Hotel in Mumbai. And I joined in sales. Now, when the Fidelio system was being implemented at the hotel, all the senior sales managers felt that this was some kind of a data entry job. And they felt that since I was the kid on the block, they said, it's your job, do it. So I had no choice. I sat there with the people who came to implement the solution. And it took a good 4 months for them to implement that solution. As they started explaining to me and started asking me questions with regards to how things happen in hotels and why a decision taken at this particular input, how that will have a domino effect on the output, that fascinated me. And in many ways, I also realized that I had a flair for that. So by the time they left after 4 months, they offered me a job. And I said, why not? I will gladly take that up. So I jumped on the next flight and came to Dubai. So Dubai at that time was booming. The Gulf Cooperation Council countries, along with North Africa, was booming at that time. And a lot of hotels started setting up shop in this part of the world. And so I moved from one hotel to the other, implementing solutions and training people on how to use those solutions. But as you can imagine, that becomes a very repetitive, mundane job after a point in time. Of course, it gave me the ability to travel across the whole of Gulf Cooperation Council countries and North Africa. So at the age of 22, I had no complaints. I was very happy doing the traveling, right? I went to places like Yemen, which unfortunately nobody can go to today. But remember, Yemen in those days actually had hotels like the Taj. There was a Taj Sheba, there was a Taj Sana. For those of you who are familiar with the story of Solomon from the Bible, the Queen of Sheba is essentially from Sheba, the place Sheba in Yemen. So I actually went there and I trained people on how to use point of sale systems. I trained people on how to check in a customer, etc. One episode that I'll never forget in my life is the people of Yemen carry a dagger. And trust me, that dagger is very sharp. Okay. They also have this thing where they chew what is called khat. Khat is a hallucinogenic. Okay. Once you have that, it gives you, it's like ganja, for lack of a better word. So when they become angry and when they become sad, you really don't know how that khat is impacting their brain. So in many ways, I was actually taking 2 steps back every time I was trying to train these people because I didn't know whether he was happy or angry at that particular point in time. But it was a learning experience nevertheless. From there, I moved to Germany because Fidelio, the company, it had its headquarters in Germany. And they said, listen, you have now gone around multiple countries. You seem to know how things work, the nuances are associated with these countries. Why don't you help us design the new release of the software? Great. Why not? I mean, from Middle East to Germany looked interesting. From heat to cold was always a good thing because I don't like heat particularly. So I went to cold and started living in Munich. And there created, along with the rest of the team, the latest version of the software called Fidelio version 6. And lo and behold, somebody in the US suddenly wakes up and says, let me buy Fidelio. So there's this company in the US called Micros, which one fine day woke up and said, and this was just the 7th month after I had joined Fidelio. What did they do? They came to Germany, they shut down the office there and moved all of us to Naples and Florida in the US. I hated that place because it reminded me of my home state, Kerala. There was only 2 kinds of climate, hot and hotter with too much of perspiration. So I desperately wanted to get out of Naples. And that is a time when Micros said, listen, we are opening out offices across the world. Fidelio has offices, Micros has offices. We need to create synergies between these operations. We are looking for volunteers to set up our Asia Pacific headquarters. So I said, where is the Asia Pacific headquarters? They said, Sydney. I said, I'm on the next flight. So I volunteered, jumped on the next flight and went to Sydney. 7 people, not one of them Australian, lands up in a hotel room in Sydney, and we set up an office. And not one of us is Aussie, right? There's a German, there's an Austrian, there's an Indian, there is a Chinese from Canada, and there is a Polish, I think he was Polish, but born and brought up in the US. So there are a bunch of guys who absolutely had no clue as to how to do business in Sydney, land up there, set up an office. But those were the boom days, right? 1998. Japan is opening up to new hotels, newer chains from across the world. Korea is opening up to new hotels. China suddenly decides to open out Fiji, Guam, the Marshall Islands, all these places, because what Micros Fidelio essentially talked about as Asia Pacific is every country between India, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands. So that is 27 different countries, right? And our job was to go to each one of these countries, set up offices, train people on how to manage these things there, and of course cater to our customers who were essentially kind of following the sun. So in those days, the Marriotts of the world, the Starwoods of the world, all of them, their policy was follow the sun. So they were essentially moving in many ways west to east as opposite to east to west. So in a way, it is a kind of a reverse migration. From there, I decided to turn entrepreneur, thanks to the dot-com era. And I lost a shirt off my back. Okay, I really don't know what the hell hit me. I lost whatever money I had made. I was literally on the streets. And the only good thing that came out of it was the venture capital company who had invested money in a company lost more money than I did. if I can get any kind of vicarious pleasure, that is the only pleasure I got out of it. Around that time, my dad, he was retiring, and I'm the only son. I have 2 sisters. So, and being a Malayali, my dad's idea of asking me to come back home was, I'm retiring, when are you coming? There was never a question of, can you do anything else? So I packed up my bags and came back to India. And then around that time, Kerala tourism was, and all these years, I've primarily been, because of Micros Fidelio, in the hospitality and leisure industry, providing systems. So when Kerala tourism in 2099, actually, end of 99, early 2000, they decided to reinvent themselves. And that is a time that God's own country and all those things got coined. There was a team under the current CEO of the Niti Aayog called, his name is Amitabh Kant. He was a senior IAS officer at that time in Kerala. He put together a team, and I was one of the guys that he put together to provide the technology base for it. And it was a very interesting ride. I mean, understanding how government works. I mean, imagine in Kerala, we had 23 different stakeholders for something as simple as tourism, because you had everybody from the panchayat president to the chief minister involved in the process of tourism. So you can imagine, too many cooks obviously spoil the broth, and if you have too many cooks, no decision gets taken. So you had a committee, the committee would deliberate and come up with the report. Then you had an empowered committee that would look at the report and tell you that it's a wrong report. And then on top of that, you had a set of secretaries who would look at the empowered committee's report and then tell you that it is wrong. And then finally, the minister would say, forget about all of that, take it down to the panchayat. So that is how good our decision-making process was at that point in time. So they wanted to consolidate all of this together, bring in the necessary technology layers to it, which we did. And I think in many ways, Kerala is considered to be a success in the tourism space. And with all humility, I'll also say I was part of that team that essentially enabled that. So 2003 is when every IT services company in India, be it the Wipros, the HCLs, the Infosys of the world, suddenly woke up and realized, man, there is money to be made in hospitality and leisure services, not products, in services. And I got interviewed by HCL, by Wipro, and by Infosys. HCL was out of question. They wanted that position was to be based out of Delhi, which is something that I wasn't particularly looking forward to. So Bangalore was the option. And anyway, I had studied in Bangalore, so Bangalore was in many ways home to me. And Wipro was what I chose. So there it was a very interesting journey, because in 2003, remember, Wipro was not this $9.5 billion behemoth that you guys know about it. At that time, it was a $320 billion company, right? But we had a very charismatic leader, Vivek Paul. Vivek Paul was the then vice chairman and CEO. And he was the guy who came up with this whole concept of coders to consultants. That was his brainchild. And I can say that I essentially set up a lab there to start with for Wipro. Then I sold myself as a consultant, and then I built a team around that. And that is how things moved forward. In 2005, I decided that I wanted to study a bit more. So I took a sabbatical and I went and did my MS in information management at the University of Delaware in the US. And as soon as I graduated, I got an offer from a company called Bearing Point. It doesn't exist now. It used to be the consulting arm of the old Anderson Consulting. I joined Bearing Point, and of all my luck, Bearing Point went belly up in exactly 4 months. So, I was suddenly in a new country without a job. Fortunately, Wipro reached out again saying, listen, anyway, you're there, you have your H1B, why don't you join us? So I rejoined Wipro, and I was taking care of Wipro customers in the hospitality and leisure space in the US, Canada, South America, and Japan. 2010, my dad died, and my mom essentially said, come back home. So I came back to Kerala, and I grew rubber and cardamom for a while. Obviously, I had no clue as to how to do any of this. And after about 8 months, my mother said, get out of the house, because I was doing such a bad job. And I was constantly whining about the fact that I didn't know how to do this. She told me to get out of the house. So I went back to Bangalore, and I went and told my then boss, or my previous boss, his name was T.K. Kulian. He was the CEO of Wipro. I told him to give me a job that will keep me gainfully underemployed. So he gave me a job. Instead of sales, he gave me marketing. And he said, you do marketing. So I sat behind a desk and I sold what I otherwise would have sold, traveling around the world and selling. And along the way, because I went to hotel school, he also put me in charge of executive briefing centers, which is facilities that large companies like Wipro and IBM and others run, where we host our most important customers, and also a lot of government officials, and our quarterly board meetings, etc., get held there. That's where we brief these people in terms of what is it that the company wishes to do, what are the new things that we've done. A whole host of research goes into it. So I was part of strategy at that point in time. So my previous, before I joined marketing, I had a gentleman by the name of Uma Mahesh, who was my boss when I was heading up the practice. He was the head of the vertical. And Umesh had left Wipro to become the CEO of AnswerSource in India. He joined us as a turnaround CEO. And I had also left subsequently to join Augrey. Augrey actually was way ahead of its time. Augrey was the first independent mobile platform for augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality. To bring all of that together onto a mobile phone was actually in many ways way ahead of its time. And Suresh Tangavel, who was the CEO of the company, brilliant man, a former DRDO scientist who brought that in place. But let's say that we agreed to disagree in terms of how to monetize the solution, let me put it that way. And therefore, one day I was sitting with Umesh, and much like any decent startup that should, the story of the genesis of Campcom is like any other decent startup in the world. I and Umesh were sitting in a bar in Bangalore. Both of us had decided that we wanted to become entrepreneurs again. Umesh had been an entrepreneur before. I had been an entrepreneur. The only difference was that he made money. I lost a shirt off my back. So now we had two very good things to do. He knows what it is to run a good business. I know how it is to screw up a business. So we were sitting in the bar. We were having Old Monk and Coke. And I took out a piece of a napkin, and we started drawing at the back of it and saying, okay, let's not focus on industry verticals and all that stuff. Let us focus on a technology and how the technology will be relevant. Will it be relevant 25 years from now? And is it a technology that we can bring out of the lab and monetize it? I said, yes, we can do that, because that's exactly the thought that was going through my mind. And there was this young coder who I had met during my time in Augrey. He had put in his papers, and I gave him some money, and I gave him literally a 2-line brief saying that I want to be able to click the picture of anything, any product, anywhere in this world. I want the system to identify it, and I should be able to buy it. I gave him 3 months. He took 3 weeks, and he gave me a prototype. From that prototype, when I showed Umesh, he said, "Boss, this is good. I'm putting in my papers." So he took a leap of faith on me. I put in my papers as well. We set up office at Diamond District in Bangalore. And Camcom, actually, the original idea was exactly what I told you. It is not what you see of it today. The idea was that when you go to a pub or you go shopping, all of us today take pictures of literally everything that we see, right? As a reference point. What if for example, I see that how do I pronounce your name? Is it Nirnimesh?
Yes, sir. Nirnimesh.
Okay. Nirnimesh. Okay. That's a very good shirt, Nirnimesh. So if I wanted to buy Nirnimesh's shirt, all I had to do was click a picture of it. It would identify that it's a blue shirt, that it had patterns. If there was a logo, it would identify what that make is, and it would connect you to a Myntra or an Amazon to buy that shirt. So instant gratification, the way of the future for millennials. That is what we wanted to do. We launched an app called Camcom. I think we had close to about 180,000 downloads in 3 days. Everybody was clicking pictures left, right, and center. Nobody was buying. Nobody bought anything. Everybody loved the platform, but nobody bought anybody. It didn't get us any money. And then I and Umesh were having a breakfast with another friend of ours, Ramesh. Ramesh is a venture capitalist at a company called Artiman. So Ramesh listened to whatever I had to tell him, and then he said, "Listen, boss, this is a B2C game. This is something that you guys have never played before. Between you and Umesh, you guys have close to probably about 62 years of B2B enterprise experience. Why the hell aren't you focusing on that? What are you trying to do in B2C? Eureka!" That is when we also realized we are in the bad role. We are in the wrong role, because that platform was very powerful. And it was Ramesh who told us, if you come back to me and you say that this platform can work in, let's say, a large industry segment like insurance. I said, okay, but I don't know anything about insurance. So I picked up the phone. I called up a couple of guys that I knew who work in insurance, said, okay, I need to find out somebody who can tell me about insurance. So I went and met a couple of insurance people, and they said, listen, can you click pictures of a damaged car and assess the severity of damage of that car? I said, yeah, why not? I mean, the platform has been built to essentially identify products. So a car is a car, right? So we put some effort into it, and Bajaj Allianz became my first customer. For those of you who use Bajaj Allianz, HDFC Ergo, or SBI General, today when you meet with an accident, you do not call an insurance assessor. You click pictures using their mobile phones. When you click those pictures and that report that you get saying that this is damaged, this is how much I'll pay you, thank you, that is our technology. That is what we provide. And suddenly we realized that a car, the defect and damage assessment of a car actually happens even before the car gets manufactured. And this platform can essentially straddle that entire value chain from component manufacturing through to used cars and everybody in between. So we said, great, now it's not that I know anything about automobile industries outside of having driven a car or a bike. So I don't know anything, but we went back, we learned, and we learned very quickly. So we essentially took it through that process. And fortunately, today we essentially provide our services to people like Motherson. Motherson is a company that makes the outside rearview mirrors of cars. So whether you're driving a Maruti or a Mercedes, the chances that the ORVM was created by Motherson is very high, because they manufacture 33.3% of the ORVMs in this world. And by the way, it's an Indian company, which very few people knew about. As a matter of fact, even I didn't know till about 9 months back. That is when I even came across Motherson. In the OEM space, or the original equipment manufacturer space, happy to say that MG India is one of my customers. They use our solution to identify defects up to 50 microns, which is below that of what the human eye can see as these cars are being assembled. Ford India is in field trials with us. We just won the Grand Challenge issued by Mercedes-Benz in Germany. and we are one of the winners. So we will most probably go in there as well. TVS India uses us. Bajaj India uses us. Hero India uses us. In the case of, and then there is what is called finished vehicle logistics. There are people who, for example, if you have a Volkswagen car that is made in Stuttgart in Germany, now obviously it has to reach Japan or India, wherever it has to be sold, right? So there is what is called finished vehicle logistics. There are people who transport that finished product across the world to various dealerships. There again, our solutions get used to assign responsibility and liability. There, I mean, typically in the component OEM and finished vehicle logistics, we deploy our solutions on rigs because of higher throughput requirements and higher granularity requirements. In the case of aftermarket, which is everything from service centers through to used cars, so service centers, insurance companies, fleet owners, and used cars, our solutions are deployed on mobile phones. Click. I mean, that's what I talked about earlier with regards to Bajaj, Reliance, and others. We also, because of the fact that we are a horizontal player, not particularly focused on a vertical or an industry segment, our choice of where we provide our solutions are as different as chalk and cheese. So I have automotive and then I have warehousing. I know it has got absolutely nothing to do with each other. But warehousing is another industry that we have a fairly big play in. Myntra, Flipkart, Emirates Post, they all use our solution. Harshita, when was the last time that you ordered something from Myntra or Amazon or Flipkart and let's say that you ordered for a blue shirt and you got a black shirt? Did you have such an experience?
Yeah, like
I think
few months back.
She buy daily.
You had that experience 2 months back.
I ordered something else and the product was totally different.
Okay.
So we returned that.
The reason why it happens is because of a huge problem that literally every major e-commerce retailer in this world faces. See, you take an e-commerce fulfillment center. It's about 100,000 square feet in size, probably even bigger. I mean, you take a look at some of the Amazon warehouses or fulfillment centers, as they call it. They're the size of 4 or 5 football stadiums. That's how big they are, right? And you have 22 feet vertical stacking. The typical inwards into these fulfillment centers are anywhere from 100 to 250,000 products every day. It's humanly impossible to do a multi-way check as to whether it's the right product that's getting into your warehouse. Because a human cannot do that multi-way check looking at a manufacturer's tag, a warehouse management sticker, and all that stuff. It's just humanly impossible. They tried, but it failed. And what that happens is what you essentially had, Harshita, the wrong product getting shipped out. Now, wrong product getting shipped out not only has a problem with a very irate customer, a disgruntled customer, reverse logistics costs are 10x of onward logistics cost. Now, when that product comes back, obviously the product has been opened, which essentially means now it has to be marked down for it to be sold again, right? Now, when do guys like Myntra, Flipkart, Amazon, etc. have sales in India? They're big bargain sales and all that. That typically happens over Dussehra, Deepavali, or any other major festival, right? Now, which Indian will buy a second-hand piece of clothing during any of these festivals? Nobody will, because everybody wants first-hand, right? Precisely. So when you have a 7% return, not only do you have a 7% return, not only do you mark it down, it essentially sits as dead stock in your inventory. Now, that is the one thing that no e-commerce retailer can essentially afford to have, because a warehouse essentially is meant to have a return on investment calculated per square inch of occupied space. That is the single biggest KPI that they have to meet. And that KPI gets shot out of the window the moment you have a situation like this. So we provide that as well. The third thing that we do, which is currently, I'm actually speaking to you from Dubai right now. We are setting up an office here on the invitation of the Dubai Chamber of Commerce. We are also setting up a lab here. So there are 2 solutions that we are developing here. One is for aircraft maintenance. I'm sure almost all of you have flown at some point. And have you ever wondered, what is it that those 3 or 4 guys who walk out of the belly of the aircraft look for before the flight takes off? It's called a pre-flight check, right? There's a bunch of guys who walk around. Now, a typical aircraft, okay, be it a 727, 737, 777, any of those, the belly of the aircraft is easily 12 to 15 feet above, right? You have the captain of the aircraft, the engineer of the aircraft, and ground staff walking, checking the underbelly of the aircraft to make sure that it's 100% damage free for it to take off. There is no audit trail because it's essentially dependent on the human eye, right? You have a checklist, right? Now, imagine if a mishap happens, right? Something goes wrong. The NTSB or the Federal Aviation Authority, all of them come back and then do an entire postmortem by recreating that entire event. But the problem is the single most important thing that you need to know is what was the condition of the aircraft before it took off. That doesn't exist. It's essentially a piece of paper which essentially tells you what it is, because of which the whole forensics associated with aircraft accidents essentially take a long time. So we are proposing that we can use our solution, what we use for automotive, to do an analysis of the underbody of the aircraft before it takes off, which can essentially do multiple things. One, obviously, you have 100% visual audit trail of the condition of the aircraft before it took off. The second thing is the moment you have a 100% visual audit trail history, what you do is you essentially now move from scheduled preventive maintenance to predictive maintenance, because you can predict when you essentially have to do maintenance, right? Every time a aircraft is scheduled for maintenance and overhaul, it's called MRO. It costs somewhere in the range of about quarter to $500,000 for that vehicle, for that aircraft to go and come back after its MRO thing. If you can predict it, imagine the amount of money that you can save. Right? The fourth one that we are creating is what is called the use of UAVs or drones as first responders in case of an emergency. Now, in many ways, it's kind of contradictory, right? We think first responders are responding when there is an emergency. Are they responding? Chances are no, they are actually reacting, right? Who reports an accident? Who reports an explosion? A person who's stuck 2 kilometers away who sees some smoke rising up, because the chances he called up the dispatch number primarily because of the fact that he sees smoke rising up and he's stuck in traffic, right? The dispatcher does not know what is the situation at ground zero, because there's nobody at ground zero who can provide them with ground zero information, because either they have been directly affected by that incident or they are running as far away as possible from ground zero, right? So because of which you have the fire force, the police, and the EMT, the medical guys reaching there, then coming to a conclusion as to how to respond to that situation. The problem there is it leads to unnecessary deaths. And by unnecessary deaths, what I mean is, what is the point in sending a policeman into the place of a gas explosion? He has no clue as to how to deal with it. He should essentially be 10 kilometers outside, creating a cordon, making sure that the ambulance stays outside of it. And it's a fire force that needs to go in there and make sure that they do what is necessary to put out the gas explosion. Now, if the fire force does not know that it's a gas explosion, then how will they respond to that situation? Are they even carrying what is necessary to put out a gas explosion? So what we are proposing there is, why don't we use drones? We'll geo-fence a drone that will operate in a 5-kilometer radius. The moment the call goes to dispatch, the drone will also self-deploy. It'll go there and provide them with a live feed to the first responders so that they can actually respond as opposed to react. So if the drone is going to report that it's a gas explosion, then the fire force knows that they need to carry whatever is necessary to put out a gas fire. The policeman knows that he needs to create a cordon 10 kilometers out so that nobody else goes into the impact zone. And the medical technician stays outside of it so that they don't unnecessarily imperil their lives. This is not just about saving lives also. It is also about a single source of truth. Now, what happens subsequent to an event? You have all the first responders write a report. If there's a fatality, the coroner has to write a report. There is a plaintiff and the defendant. There is the insurance company. There is a court system. There is a government. All of these people are essentially writing reports based on what they think happened. It's a perception of what happened, not the truth. The truth can only be found by somebody who was right there, right? Everything else is essentially something that you have decided based on what you saw subsequent to the fact. Now you have an important thing coming directly to you, unadulterated feed, which can be a single source of truth. Now, the moment you have a single source of truth, which can be parsed by an artificial intelligence system, the reports automatically get written. Everybody is writing the same report, right? So what that brings is, instead of spending 63, by the way, the United States spends $63 billion on their 911 dispatch system every year. And that does not count, that's federal money. That is not counting what the state spends, not counting what the county spends. That is a significantly large money of even otherwise. But the money keeps going up, the number of deaths also keep going up. So what if I provided you with a solution that could essentially make this cost center into a revenue center? That is what that's what we're trying to develop for the government of Dubai here in the UAV system. Now, coming back to entrepreneurship, the reason why I talked about the cost center and the revenue center is, how do you essentially position anything? Like I said, technology is only an enabler or a facilitator for an end solution, right? Why do people like me exist, right? We play that bridge. We play the bridge of being able to tell a person, for example, right now, just I told you about the first responder solution. If I had gone and told the ruler of Dubai or the Dubai Police Authority or the Dubai Road Transport Authority or the Emergency Authority that I'll take a Honeywell drone, I'll put a TensorFlow stack on it, I will use FLIR cameras, I'll feed all of that to you, he'll tell me that is a door, get the hell out, right? Instead, I go and tell him the one thing that he understands. Let me make this cost center to a revenue center. He immediately understands what I'm trying to tell him, because he understands the benefit of what is coming out of it. That is entrepreneurship. That is what you essentially are trying to prove in this world, right? If I had gone and told the insurance company that I can use a mobile phone camera into which I will essentially create an app, that app will have XYZ stack, and that stack will essentially do XYZ parsing, it'll provide you the XY coordinates, all of that is irrelevant to him. All he wants to know is, can the damn thing tell me what is the accident and what is the damage severity? That's all he wants to know, right? Is he willing to pay me money for it? Absolutely, he's willing to pay me money for it. So the whole idea of entrepreneurship is, ladies and gentlemen, no sale happens between two people, two companies. It happens between two people, right? It'll happen between me and Harshita or Mohan or Nirnimesh. When we sit across a table, what I need to do is tell you a story that will make you look good. Your KPIs have to be taken care of so that you will get your next promotion, I'll get my sale. That is what entrepreneurship is all about. It is the ability to tell a person and convince him that what he's going to take from you is not only going to make him look good, but ensure that his next promotion is on the way. That, in many ways, is unfortunately something that a lot of people don't pay attention to either. See, this complementarity of skill sets, right? I'm a failed entrepreneur. Umesh is a successful entrepreneur. So that failure and the success essentially has taught us what to do and what not to do, right? So Umesh, I'm sure you would have noticed the gray hair and the balding head, right? Umesh is even senior to me, right? His idea of attacking a problem is, where is the screwdriver? Because he's a mechanical engineer. His idea of attacking a problem is very different from the way that I attack a problem. The way I would attack a problem is, who is the person? That we go and find out if I can essentially convince him that he has to give me time, or he has to necessarily believe that I can deliver what he has to. Umesh will not do that. Umesh will pick up the screwdriver and start opening to see what is the problem, the root cause analysis. On top of that, you also need the strategic focus, right? That is where Mahesh comes in, our third co-founder, our CEO. The reason why Mahesh is the CEO is because he's the youngest of us, because we decided we did not want to be CEOs, right? Mahesh brings focus, undiluted focus in terms of what is in it for Camcom, which is very important, because as an entrepreneur, it is very, very important for you to understand what is in it for us. Ladies and gentlemen, any person who tells you that they started their entrepreneurship journey because they wanted to change the world is lying. Okay, 100% lying. They all started entrepreneurship to become rich. Okay, so am I. When you have money, you can change the world. When you don't have money, you can talk about changing the world. But when you have money, you can actually change the world. That is the reason why my previous boss, Premji, the likes of Mr. Tata, Ratan Tata, the Ambanis, the Adanis, the Buffets, the Gates, All of them are successful because they made the money and then put that money to work. So please don't get into entrepreneurship because you want to change the world. No. Please get into entrepreneurship to make money so that you have what is necessary to change the world. Anybody who tells you otherwise, that I got it because of altruistic motive, is lying. 100% lying. There is no such thing as altruistic motive here. Everybody is driven by money. Yes, there are a whole host of other things that drive you, without doubt, right? I have people in my team who are fantastic engineers, computer scientists, data scientists, whose only focus and mission and vision in life is to essentially make computer vision better. Without doubt, a very, very altruistic motive. But for that, money is still necessary. That is why guys like me exist, because we need to make the money for them to realize their dream. So our chief scientist, like Ben, Ben is a brilliant guy. Okay, he heads our computer vision lab. He's only 27 years old. I mean, he is so bloody good at what he does. My job is to ensure that he has the necessary resources to do what he does. That is my job as an entrepreneur. Because what he is going to do is going to change the world. And my job is to enable that. My job is to facilitate that. Maybe, at some point in time, we become a unicorn. I have $1 billion. My honest intent is to essentially get a resort. Maybe I should actually speak to you guys if there is any good resort in Andhra Pradesh that I should pick up. And, that's all I want to do. Sundowners can happen even in the morning. So I don't mind my old mug at 11 a.m. also. I have no problems with that. But that money will enable many, many things. See, let's be honest. I mean, my wife keeps telling me, do you know how much money we spent on a monthly basis for our household activities? It's only some 50 or 60,000 rupees. There really isn't going to be more money than that or less money than that I will spend. Because this is after spending 5,000 rupees on books, which, by the way, is the only thing that I spend money on, actually. Every month, I need 5,000 rupees on books that I spend. Outside of that, it is me and my wife and our dog, Prabhakaran. That's all. So, we don't need more money than that. Nobody needs more money than that. So when you have money and you have made it, you realize that self-realization comes automatically, that you really don't need too much of money. That is the reason why Warren Buffett still drives his old Cadillac. That's the reason why he still stays in his old house. That is why Bill Gates does not go out and buy islands. That is the reason why Bill Gates does not go out and buy Boeing 777s. No, because they don't need that. Now you know that there is only so much that you can do with money. Does money buy you happiness? Absolutely it does. Because money in itself does not buy you happiness, but everything else that you need for happiness, money buys. So get the money first. Then you can do whatever is it that you want with your life. The other question that a lot of people have asked me, parents and entrepreneurship. Absolutely. The first person who told me that I should not become an entrepreneur, despite coming from a family of entrepreneurs, we are a 4th generation business family, was my family, my mother. She told me, do not become an entrepreneur. I really don't know why that is the case. It's just a Indian mentality, or maybe we haven't come out of that deprivation syndrome that was there when at least when my parents were growing up. Because India was pretty bad. Let's be honest. India was pretty bad in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It's only towards the 80s that slowly things started changing. And in many ways, I was born in 72. So I'm what you call the bridge generation, right? We know the old dial telephones. We have seen that. You guys probably would have never seen something like that. I had a PCMCIA card which did pee every time I tried to connect to the internet. And that too, the speed was 28.28 kbps. Right? So we have essentially bridged that. You guys don't understand a lot of the things that your parents and your parents are probably my age now, that we have gone through. But then, are your parents correct? The answer is no, they are not. Because I think an entrepreneur, and specifically I'll tell this to the ladies in this group, you girls are the world's best multitaskers. You are born multitaskers, right? The best bosses that I've had are women. They know what to do, how to do it, when to do it without pissing off everybody. Men don't know how to do that. We are in many ways like a railway track. We keep going straight. We do not essentially take diversions all that very well. It can be built over a period of time, but you girls are blessed with that. So go ahead and become entrepreneurs, because a woman entrepreneur essentially does a lot better than a man entrepreneur. I'll tell you why. Because women are more empathetic, and women always has a better downstream effect than men. Because when you essentially have money, it automatically translates into money for multiple other people. Men that way are selfish to the core. Women have the ability to pass on a lot of these things even as you make it. Men are selfish. I'm not saying that they don't do it. We all do it, right? But please, if you decide to become an entrepreneur, you're automatically a leader. You're not a manager. A manager is essentially somebody that you can make, right? You are essentially managing something, right? It's not rocket science. Let's be honest, right? People have asked me, by the way, I also did an MBA in between. I don't even know why the hell I did it. I learned nothing from it. I learned absolutely nothing from it, right? MBA is not even worth the piece of paper it's printed on, because what you need to learn is by going down to the grassroots level and understanding what is it that people want, your customer wants, your end beneficiary wants. Moment you have that nailed down, you're done. That is all there is to it. This is not rocket science. It is the ability to have complementary skills. Putting together the team is very important. Not everybody can do everything on their own. Let's be clear, right? Ratan Tata would not have been successful but for the number of people that he put together and gave them 100% independence to do what they wanted to do, right? The same thing with Premji. It is not Premji who built Wipro. It was 300, 400 others who he handpicked to essentially lead certain things for them to pick up. Team is a very, very important thing, right? So when I said I call myself the chief miscellaneous officer, I wasn't lying. I remember the last time I was in office, one of my young colleagues came up and asked, sir, where do I dump the garbage? I said, why don't you give it to me? Because it's that simple, right? I mean, if you can't figure out where the garbage is, then give it to me. I will take it and throw it wherever I think it is necessary. I'm not saying that is a bad thing. There is a lack of inquisitiveness. See, was it really all that very difficult to figure out where the garbage bin is? Where would you look for a garbage bin? You go there and look and you'll find the garbage. But when you are not inquisitive enough to even find out where the garbage bin is, then maybe there's a problem there, right? Well, I think with that, I come to the end of my monologue. I'm more than happy to take any questions that you may have. I go back, I will end with this. Every person, when they decide to turn an entrepreneur, is essentially aspiring to be a leader. Every time they try to turn entrepreneur, they are aspiring to be a leader. And so entrepreneurship is not just about being successful at business. Even if you fail, you essentially have built a skill set that will stand in good stead as you move forward. People ask me what next for me. I tell them I want to be the president of India. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks a lot, sir. We really enjoyed your life journey, actually. And that was so inspiring, sir. And we can see the pain behind this smile, I think.
Well, I would be lying if I said there is no pain, but obviously there was a lot of pain, but a lot of that pain is also a good thing because you learn so much.
Oh, sir. Our audience will find what a real entrepreneur is from your life story, and I think
I hope so.
how to satisfy in life that is more important than everything. And you look very satisfied, sir.
I'm very satisfied with my life. I mean,
Yes,
I can't complain about anything. I mean, I keep telling people when they ask me, are you satisfied with life? I mean, what exactly should I be satisfied about? The fact that I have money? No, money in itself is not going to give me satisfaction, but money will essentially ensure that I build satisfaction around me. So when Prabhakar and my dog, it doesn't matter whether I'm out for 10 seconds or for 10 days. his reaction to the time that I opened the door is the same, right? He will jump all over me and lick me. So, that is satisfaction. When my mother looks at me and says, "You're done yourself. You're done well for yourself, son." That's good. When my wife says, "Not bad," that's also a good thing, because she's the one who keeps telling me that the only good decision that I ever took about, especially when I started Camcom, was that you went and picked the right partners. You didn't pick a bunch of losers, which is what she keeps telling me, that along with myself, you pick a bunch of losers to go and set up business. So for once, she tells me I did the right thing. So that is also satisfaction.
So if we can get started with the Q&A session.
Please.
Yeah. I would request the audience to please type in their questions in the chat box. Nirnimesh and Harshita will convey our questions to Mr. Ajit sir.
Yeah.
So, getting started with the first, if I can begin with the questioning. So, it is a cliche that entrepreneur needs to have a lot of skills under his belt. They need to be really well skilled in a lot of areas. Let it be skills, let it be sales, let it be marketing, let it be technology. It is it imprinted in our brains that this is what entrepreneurship is. Putting your leg in a lot of boats. But sir, with all due respect, you don't seem you don't try to focus on so many boats at once. That is what we have learned right now. So technology part, you have left it to someone so that they can manage it. So what is the reason behind this cliche that you have to learn a lot of skills?
We Indians have this amazing habit of creating cliches by creating stereotypes, and over a period of time, we mainstream the stereotype. So that's precisely what it is, Yuvaneet, right? That's precisely my answer to that. I mean, it's just an unfortunate thing with the Indian scenario. Look at me. I do not write a single line of code. And what am I doing? I'm running an artificial intelligence company based on computer vision. If you had asked me 3 years back, what is computer vision? I would have said, I don't have a clue as to what computer vision is. If somebody had told me AI meant artificial intelligence, I would have told them, no, it's absolutely impossible is what it means to be. It is just a matter of understanding what you need to do, playing to your strengths. That's why I said the important thing is putting the team together. Yes, you learn, and you learn very quickly. I don't consider myself to be very adept, as I said, at mathematics, right? Therefore, I don't consider myself to be very adept at Excel. But if I have no choice, I have to learn, right? I will learn. What is the problem? There is nothing in this world you can't learn. Apply yourself enough, and you will learn something. The only thing that I have been unable to learn all these years, despite going to hotel school, is how to cook an omelette without burning it. So everything else is you can learn.
That was a great answer. I think Unit Bhaiya is satisfied. So we have a question from the audience now. Mr. Kushal is asking that, so what is the driving force behind your never stopping confidence? He is pleased with your personality and how cool you are.
I guess in many ways, I'm not a person who believes that positivity is something that you should. I mean, I believe that positivity is something that you should wake up with, right? I love people. I enjoy speaking to people. I enjoy meeting people because I learn something every day. I try my level best to ensure that I learn something from everybody that I come across. I'm human like anybody else, right? I go through my depressions, I go through my bouts, I go through all of that, and to the level where my wife tells me at times that you're PMSing. So, those are things also that she calls out. But if we can essentially look at life as a learning process, you really don't have to worry about it, right? You're learning. Yes, it may have gone well, it may not have gone well. The moment you start sitting and thinking about, see, introspection does not have retrospective effect. Okay, it's very good to introspect, but do not expect it to have retrospective effect because it's not going to change anything in your past, right? Leave what has to be left and move on. Just move on. I mean, for me, positivity is that I essentially take everything that comes to me in the way that I would like to take it. If somebody turns out and abuses me to my face, I would probably, there are two ways in which I can respond, right? I mean, of course, I can react, I can slap him, but that wouldn't help him, neither would it help me, right? I can respond in two ways. Either I can be very catty, sarcastic, give him back in the same token, which essentially leaves two people pissed off, or I can essentially make sure that I calm him down, tell him that there's no reason for him to abuse me, and move things forward, which leaves two happy people. So that would be my answer to that. That's how I would look at things.
That was really nice, sir.
Thank you,
So
sir.
before moving to next question, sir, I have my personal doubt. Like we are doing engineering, and if we came in the situation like we are failing degree or in that, like and we are we have to choose to go with the entrepreneurship or to choose with the company. Where to go, sir, actually, and what thing we have to keep in mind before taking a decision?
Why do you want to fail?
Sir, we have to take now. Either we have to go for a company, or we have to do whatever idea we have to stick with that. Like you are a CM of
See,
renowned company.
No, Nadimesh, there are two ways in which you can approach it. No, I will never say that working is a bad thing. I'm not going to say that, because obviously at the end of the day, everybody has to work, right? If you have something that you passionately believe is going to change your fortunes, go for it. Because the single most important thing is, unless you have tried, how do you know whether it will succeed or fail? Try it. Try it once. Okay. But if it has to fail, then make sure that it fails fast. To the earlier example that I told you, when we decided to launch a B2C app, we failed fast because we realized that it wasn't giving us any money, right? So that is why we quickly changed gears and moved into something else. So when you want to fail, make sure that you fail fast, right? So that you don't lose time as well. On the other hand, if you think that you are not ready, because there are certain basic things that you need to know about business, right? Something that Yuvneet had talked about earlier. I mean, you don't have to be a jack of all trades and master of none. No, that's not the thing. You need to identify certain things that you necessarily need to master, right? For example, it can be something as simple as networking. It can be something as simple as knowing Tally, right? Because that is something that you are very, very good at.
Yeah.
Right? Make sure that you're good at that. Make sure that you're good at that. Because if that takes you 2 years of work experience, it'll only help you in your entrepreneurship journey. Because you are good at something. The rest you can build. The rest you can bring in the team to build it. But there is something that you need to be good at as well, right? And that is important. There has to be one. I mean, like I said, it's not necessarily a tangible asset. It can be an intangible asset. You could be very good at building relations with people. You could be a very good networker, right? These are also skills that you need to build. So they're not necessarily tangible or intangible, but necessarily be good at one thing. Then build everything around that.
Okay, sir. I will keep that in mind.
Sir, I have a small doubt. Can I ask?
Of course, please.
Yeah. So as you said that you failed multiple times. So do you believe that keeping backup plans is, is it good or just what
Yes,
are your opinions of keeping backup plans?
You'll have to be a little more explicit than that, Harshita. What do you mean by a backup plan? You mean, will I work and try to become an entrepreneur?
No. If I have a plan A and my plan A doesn't work well, then I can go for plan B. Like that, is it good?
Is that a lack of confidence, or is it like we have to? We should have a backup plan.
No, it's not a lack of confidence at all. It's not a lack of confidence at all. See, nobody puts all eggs into one basket. Let's be clear. No entrepreneur, no businessman, no manager, for that matter, no leader, politicians, for example, puts all eggs into one basket. You will have multiple baskets, right? But during the time that you're focused on that egg in the basket, make sure that it has 100% focus. You cannot be an entrepreneur while you are studying. You cannot be a manager while you're studying. You cannot be all of that at the same time. Forgive my French because there is no other way to say it. You cannot do something half-assed. You have to do it full. Right? If you are in it, do it. Otherwise, don't do it. When I went back to college, I was 32 years old to do my MS. Right? I was the eldest in that class of a cohort of 16 people in the graduate program. That was okay. I essentially turned the disadvantage into an advantage because I challenged 7 of the credits. I wrote the exams without attending classes. I finished a 2-year program in 1 year and 4 months. So that is a backup plan. Right? So essentially turn what you have into an advantage. Backup plans are also in many ways a part of what you understand from people around you. See, if Ramesh that day had not told us, you guys are not focusing on your single most important advantage, which is your B2B enterprise experience, and you guys are trying to do something that you didn't do. If we hadn't taken that, we would have failed, right? But what did we do? We took that and we turned that to our advantage. So, you need to be able to be quick, nimble, agile. Those are things that will help you.
Thank you, sir. So we got a very interesting question from Mr. Suman. He is asking that we have soil health card to see which type of crop should be sown and which is done through experiments. So can we do that through AI?
Like I said, 3 years back, AI for me was absolutely impossible. You're speaking to somebody who's not a technologist. But Suman, let me, in my little knowledge of artificial intelligence, take a stab at it. Absolutely, it can be done using artificial intelligence based on whatever I have read and some of the conversations that I've had with universities in Israel. They do use artificial intelligence today to grade soils. As a matter of fact, there's a university, maybe whenever you have time, look them up online. It's called Technion, which is the Technical University of Israel. They have a AI division focused on farming, on animal husbandry, and a bunch of other agriculture related stuff. So you might be able to find more details about that there. Unfortunately, I would not be in a right position to give you information more detailed than what I just gave you.
Thank you, sir, for the answer.
Sorry for the interruption.
Sir, I have a request. Actually, you seem really a sorted and cool human being, which is rare in this busy world. So, and we have many women and ladies audience today listening you. What kind of a tips you would like to give them? Already we talk about the women entrepreneurs. So, any tip when they'll start? Me being a lady who want to start.
Ma'am, what's your name, ma'am?
Janhavi. I'm General
Janhavi.
Secretary of ENISA.
Okay, excellent. One of my best friends, Lakshmi Menon, she is actually probably the best entrepreneur I've ever come across in my life, because she comes up with the most simplest of solutions for the most complicated of problems. Okay, whenever you get a chance, you should look her up online. Her name is Lakshmi Menon. She's the person who, when the floods happened in Kerala, a bunch of weavers lost their livelihood, right? Because all the stuff that they have woven got dirt and everything else in them. She took this entire thing and created these rag dolls called Chekuti powers, which she took from the destroyed, the dirt-laden woven fabric. She essentially just cut it out and essentially made a small doll out of it. And that became a worldwide standard for resilience. She then subsequently, during the COVID crisis, created a solution called Shaya. Now, everybody is talking about PPE waste because PPE waste has a significant amount of plastic in it, right? What do you do with that after the PPE has been created? It's generating tons and tons of weight. She took those, plaited it like you would plait your hair, and created beds out of it called Shaya, which is today used by literally every government hospital in Kerala. So I have always found women entrepreneurs, like I said, to be thinking out of the box, to essentially come up with the most simplest of solutions for the most complex of problems. So, Janvi, to answer your question, you are blessed with that already. You just need to think slightly differently in terms of what is it that you want to do. Never ever be limited by one thing, right? Every time people tell you, do not reinvent the wheel, they have already put a limit to your imagination. Tell the guy who tells you do not reinvent the wheel that he doesn't know what imagination is. Neither does he know what innovation is, nor does he know what entrepreneurship is. Because you have to reinvent the wheel for it to essentially differentiate. I'm not saying that every situation requires you to reinvent the wheel. No. There are times when you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? It may be better for you to not reinvent the wheel. But do not think that you should not reinvent the wheel, because reinvention of the wheel is what will essentially set your imagination free. If everybody had said that, we shouldn't reinvent the wheel, then no rocket would have left the world. We would still haven't gone to moon or Mars or anywhere else, because you do not need wheels to go there, right? They invented something new that could take them there. Otherwise, we would have all been on Earth. We would have never gone there. So, Janvi, I hope I have managed to answer your question in a way. Outside of that, like I said, please do look up Lakshmi. She will probably give you more inputs with regards to how to think outside the box.
That was actually inspiring and key point. We'll look into it. Thank you so much, sir.
I have a question.
Yes,
sir.
Devesh. Of course, Devesh.
Sir, as you have mentioned in the earlier part of your speech, that you have went through lots of foreign countries and trained people there. And I think you might also gain knowledge from that. So you think that we as an entrepreneur should went through different countries and foreign countries and acquire knowledge from there, like developing countries or developed countries, and then come back to India and just apply their knowledge here? Or just we should stay in India, acquire knowledge within India and just apply it within India? Because some people just go foreign, talented people in the search of knowledge, and they stay there, never come back.
See, travel, whether it is in the country, within the state, outside the country, developing country, is always an educational lesson. Okay, you learn tons of things that you otherwise would never learn when you travel. The applicability of that into a specific context, well, that essentially depends on the context, right? Let me take a simple example, Devesh. Andhra Pradesh today has a lot of areas where captive farming, fish farming happens, right? Aquaculture, right? Captive fish farming did not come to India from the US or any such place. It came to us from Vietnam. Some guy who went to Vietnam realized that there is enough scope to do something like that in India. That is where the genesis of the idea came, right? So it essentially depends on the context. Yes, are you going to be richer in experience, richer in thought process, richer in the way that you perceive things because you have traveled? Absolutely, without doubt, right? I've been fortunate to travel to multiple places in this world where typically a lot of people don't go. For example, Yemen. Yemen is not exactly on the tourist map of a lot of people, right? But I happened to go there. I went to Syria. Today, you cannot even enter Syria, right? I went to Egypt. I went to Lebanon. I went to Tripoli. These are not places that today a lot of people would even think about going to. But each and every one of those places taught me a very important lesson. I'm always, everybody asks me, what is the most interesting place that I've been to? And I tell them it is Damascus, the capital of Syria. Damascus is essentially in the main souk in Damascus. There is a line, okay? And that line is essentially kept as a bronze rivet that essentially denotes what is a Christian quarter and what is a Muslim quarter, right? And that souk has been there from the times of the Phoenicians. Way before Christianity or Islam even came to being, this has been there from the time of the Romans and even before them, because Damascus was a very, very important trading port. Now, in that souk, one day I was standing there and I stood on that line and I looked at both sides. And it's just amazing when you know a little bit of history, the kind of changes that you suddenly see. Otherwise, you would never see. Right? Most people don't even pay attention to that line, but that line is actually meant to demarcate what is Damascus of the Christian Damascus and the Muslim Damascus. When you stand there and you look at both sides, you suddenly realize that there is a stark difference. There is a very stark difference. And suddenly history comes rushing back at you in terms of, and suddenly makes you realize how stupid is it for all of this to happen. So that is also a learning, right?
Thank you, sir. It was really
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. So moving ahead to this question is Q&A. Our audience have many interesting questions. As you have said that teammates are one of the most crucial things we should have. Like these are the leaders of success. So our audience has many questions about that. Like one of our audience, Mr. Suraj Sunkara, is asking like how to find real business partners, like how to identify them, or we should directly have faith in them, or we have something like that.
Sure. It's a very valid question, Suraj. I and Umesh have known each other since 2003 because he was my boss in Wipro. We are kept in touch. So now it's been 2003 to 2021. So 18 years, right? Mahesh, the third co-founder, I did not know him, neither Umesh. We did not know him from Adam till 2019. We had no idea such a person existed, right? At times, when things have to go, God also plays a role, I would think, right? All the stars start aligning in a particular way. One day we get a call from a friend of ours, Yamuna, who runs a social entrepreneurship thing called Cab Dost that deals with financial inclusion for cab drivers. She wanted to use our office meeting room because her CTO was helping a pro bono, and he was able to offer them time only twice a week. So she wanted a slightly larger room than what her office had, and she said, "Can I use your office?" I think Umesh was out meeting some customer. I was in office that day. We said, why not? I mean, Yamuna is very, very dear to us, and she's doing a fantastic job in terms of providing financial inclusion for otherwise people who would never pay taxes or get loans, etc. The cab drivers. So I was sitting and doing my work. Yamuna and her team went into the meeting room. I used to smoke in those days. So I was standing outside my office having a smoke, and this gentleman walks out and he takes a cigarette from me, and we got talking. His name is Mahesh. So we got talking. You won't believe it. We spoke for 4 hours standing there. He forgot about the work that he was actually come for. We just continuously spoke and stood there and talked. By the end of those 4 hours, he asked me, well, shall I also come on board? And we said, yes. That is how it happened. So at times, you don't go out searching for people, they come to you. But it is very important to understand that there is a level of camaraderie, a level of vibe, to use a millennial term, a level of vibe that should exist between people, right? It is not like, I and Umesh and Mahesh don't have heated arguments. We do. We absolutely do, right? There are times when we completely disagree with each other, but we also know how to agree to disagree, because we know that each person brings a skill set that is important. So we defer to that. So I'm not going to go and take panga with Umesh when he tells me this is how coding has to be done. No, I will not. But at the same time, he will not come and take panga with me when I say this is how the website should look, right? Because we work to each other's skills, right? And it is important. I'm hoping that I'm answering your question, Suman. But it is important to find that mix of people who you can agree to disagree with. That is the most important thing. You don't all have to agree on everything. You all don't have to disagree on everything, but you have to learn to agree to disagree.
I think Suraj is satisfied with your example. And we have another question related to this. Like now you are having a good team, and but still you are facing some problems in the company and it start in a great loss. So how did you manage that? Like you start firing those teammates, or you will continue with that?
We have never fired a single person. We are a team of just 32 people in Bangalore. I'm the only guy in Dubai, by the way. We haven't hired anybody here. We're just a team of 32 people. We couldn't find a garage, so we took the next best option, the basement of a house. Okay, that is all we have in Bangalore, right? It's a fairly large basement. So we have 30 people there. During COVID, we are a venture capital funded company, by the way. We do have a VC. We raised our pre-series A round. During COVID, when everybody said that we need to cut salaries across and all that stuff, even our VC told, we said no. We the co-founders took salary cuts, but we made sure that none of our employees had to take a cut. None of our team members had to take a cut. I hope I answered it. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, sure, sir. And he's satisfied, we hope. So we would like to wind up the Q&A session with this, sir. And thank you, sir, for all these knowledges which you gave to us today. And we are very delighted and got an idea about the journey of an entrepreneur.
And how to be satisfied.
Yeah.
Yeah, in this point, I
Life is
completely agree
too
with you.
short. Life is too short. You have to be satisfied with what you have, because it makes no sense for you to have regrets. It makes no sense to continue vengeance. It makes no sense to have fights. If you, by all means, forgive. You don't have to forget, but forgive and move on, because life is too short for anything else.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You brought down our, what we usually have, our idealized entrepreneurs, going on about their great values and altruistic nature. But thanks for bringing a real world perspective to this webinar. That's what we needed, a ground level reality.
Yes, sir. I also want to convey a message to our audience, like from the sir's life history. It truly depicts that we will win. We will win, not immediately, but definitely. So just be patient and do whatever you are good at. So
Exactly. It was not just the entrepreneurial talk, but it was like how to be a good human being also. Like there were many things which we can learn from your talk, sir. It was really inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And sir, we hope that your association with our E&I cell continues, sir.
More than happy to be at your service anytime. Like I said, I normally respond to any message that is sent to me within 12 hours. And by the way, I do it myself. I don't have an executive assistant or anything. So, I make it a point to respond to any, information that is asked of me in 12 hours. Feel free to reach out to me. I have no problems whatsoever. You have my contact details. I think almost all of you have my cell phone numbers and my email ID. More than happy to be of any assistance that I can to the future leaders of.
Good evening,
thank you, sir.
I'm Dr. Premalata.
Yeah, ma'am, please.
Good evening, sir. I'm Dr. Premalata.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
Ajit Nair, sir, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and delivering a very good talk which is needed for these millennials, especially in this scenario, in the pandemic scenario, sir. Thank you, sir. It was so good to hear to your words. I think we'll have a very good long association with ourselves. Hope to see you and associate with you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. It was my pleasure.
You can go ahead.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, sir, for making this evening very wonderful.